y'all. I'm Andrew.
I'm Robi.
I'm Sandy.
And we are coming at you from Free Tours by Foot New Orleans, giving you a tour of the French Quarter celebrating Pride. We're going to show you some of the LGBTQ destinations of the present and some of the important stories from the past. Robi, help me remember, what all are we covering? We've got the possibly oldest gay bar in the United States.
The gay civil rights movement, which cascaded a whole bunch of stuff that started to happen down here.
We've got gay Mardi Gras cruise.
Gay famous figures of New Orleans.
There were famous lesbians.
And we're also gonna share some queer-affirming folklore from back before New Orleans even existed.
That's important.
I mean, there were lesbian bars.
So, Robi, anything we forgot?
No, I don't think we forgot anything. I think that's it. You hear
lesbians?
something? Do you hear something?
There's sort of a hissing sound.
I mean, I'm here for a reason, right?
It's sort of shrill.
I got all dressed up.
Let's,
I'm
just gonna do a little bit of sound work and try to keep this a little smoother. There we go.
Lesbians come here.
You know, you just get used to it.
Like
At some point, you just don't even hear it anymore.
Lesbian scene.
Let's go. Come on,
We're gonna get started, y'all. Y'all, we're starting the walk on the lower end of Bourbon Street. The street is famous for bars, but that's the other end. The end that we're at is mostly houses, and a lot of this is stuff owned by gay couples who have moved here to be a part of this scene. The middle is really where you find the gay bar scene. The far other end of it is bars that are mostly for straight people and whatever they like to do. But in the middle, you get a couple of blocks of gay bars, and the area around them is where you see things going down in terms of like gay festivals and stuff. So Pride, Southern Decadence, which is the biggest of these every year. And also we have Mardi Gras has some special events, Halloween even. We have a gay Easter parade, and we're a little bit sending that home right now. So all of that stuff happens through this area, and if you walk through it, the thing you notice first and kind of loudest is a couple of bars called Oz and the Bourbon Pub on either side of Bourbon Street. But as you get down further, innocuously, you might catch possibly the oldest gay bar in the United States. We're not quite there yet. It used to be right here. So this bar behind us is called Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop, and it hasn't always been called that. Today, this is a welcoming bar, but not specifically a gay bar. It originally opened as Cafe Lafitte back in 1933, so there was already a pretty well-developed gay scene here by then, and it comes from a couple of things. 1920s, you get some artsy people moving here looking for a neighborhood where they won't be policed too much and they have an easygoing life doing all kinds of illegal things like gay stuff and alcohol. And then when you get to the 1940s, it really gets going. Like World War II really is the reason why a lot of the quarter as we know it today is how it is, and the gay scene is part of that. So during this time, lots of young men, they're far from home, they end up coming to New Orleans. About a third of the US military passes through New Orleans, either on leave from a military base or they are shipping out through New Orleans. And let's do some walking over towards the other one, y'all. As they come and spend time here, they discover that this is a place where the rules aren't the same as back home, and some of them have a fun first experience, and they remember this as a place to maybe come back to after the war and try out at more leisure. And some of them get caught too. So like sometimes, if you were in the military, you got a list of bars you weren't allowed to go to, and maybe you figured out that those were the gay bars, but if you got caught going there, you were dishonorably discharged, you were out, and you were just dropped where you were. And they were stuck here pretty much. So you get a big swell in the population then that has never gone away. And that population in the quarter looks a lot like the US military as of 1940s. It's mostly men, it's mostly white, it's cisgendered, and it's a lot of people not from here too. So limitations for sure.
Yeah, it's still that way today. There's not a lot of lesbian representation in the French Quarter, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
But used to be, and you patronize some of these places.
No, there used to be some lesbian bars in the quarter, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
I want to touch on something that you brought up with the military, which actually caters to me. For those of you who don't know, I was in the NRTC program for a number of years, and even this was 2003. So in 2003, I was still facing discrimination in the military about being LGBTQ. And at that time, of course, I wasn't discovering myself. I knew who I was already. So even till recently, only recently, did you actually can find like acceptance in the military. Come and think of it, Andrew and I moved here about 5-6 years ago, permanently. And I can tell you now from my own experience, like the way I was treated as a person of color, even being LGBTQ in the French Quarter, it's changed completely because the representation for most gay people back then was just straight white looking men. Even though they were gay, you have to present yourself a certain way. Have all these abs, have all these muscles. Now they're a lot more accepting. You find a lot more bars are more accepting of people of color, no matter where you come from. If you're questioning, if you don't even know if you're gay, straight, bi, whatever you want to call yourself, you find the community nowadays a lot more accepting of you as a person, period.
To round up the story of Cafe Lafitte, y'all, this is it today. It doesn't have the same name that it used to, but what happened in 1951, the owner of the previous building died, and the management of the bar didn't have the money to buy the place, so it changed hands, and the new owner didn't care for the old crowd, so exiled the whole customer base from the place. And so now today, this is Cafe Lafitte in Exile. That's the name of it. And so if you were to ask somebody where they wanted to meet up and they said Lafitte's, you have to ask them Exile or Blacksmith. And what they tell you tells you a little bit about them.
I'm gonna go get a drink.
All right.
All right, Sandy's gonna get a drink.
I'm going with Sandy.
Y'all go for it. I'll go talk about terrible things that have happened in the past. We'll do the heavy stuff. You know, we've come across to another part of the French Quarter where we'll be able to spell out this story of the tougher times for New Orleans' community a little better. Anywhere you go that has a gay community, there's a commonality where coming into the same place means being able to find each other, but it also means other people being able to find you. And so there tend to be this timeline of outrages throughout the history of any particular city's community, and New Orleans has had its share. Nationwide, we talk a lot about the Stonewall riots, New York's kind of turning point in 1969, but they happen in cities individually. And in New Orleans, some standouts, going back to 1958, 3 Tulane students, Tulane University, went to the bar we saw earlier, the Cafe Lafitte in Exile, and they were looking to do what they called rolling a queer, which was finding a guy, luring him somewhere, mugging him, and knowing that there wouldn't be any legal consequences because he couldn't go to the police without risking his own safety. They targeted a guy named Fernando Rios, brought him into a dark alley, and beat him to death. And at trial, their lawyers argued first his homosexuality, which made the attack on him in the context of the time understandable to begin with. And then they also argued that Fernando Rios' skull was too thin, and that his death from that attack was a completely unimaginable side effect that they couldn't have anticipated. And all 3 of those men got off without any consequences. A little later on, 1967, was the arrest of Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw was a really well-positioned businessman in town, publicly closeted, but privately very much a part of the social gay community here. And in 1967, our district attorney charged him with conspiring in the JFK assassination. And at trial, again, this guy basically went mostly out of his way to argue that Clay Shaw was gay, which he was, and at the time that meant he was morally suspect and probably anti-government. So in 1967, our district attorney charged Clay Shaw with conspiring in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He basically spent the trial, again, arguing that Clay Shaw was gay and that made him suspect, and called the assassination of the president a homosexual thrill killing, whatever that means. And in this case, there wasn't enough evidence for the jury to actually convict him. They let him off after an hour of deliberations, but the suspicion and the attention was enough that the guy had to stay in hiding pretty much the rest of his life. Past that, much more recently, in 1992, you get a situation where an HIV positive man was arrested by the police in his own home here, was beaten until he bled, and then the police charged him with attempted murder because his HIV positive blood got on a police officer. And most recently, of the ones I'll mention at least, in 2017, there was a 2-day sequence where 2 different Black trans women were both violently killed, drawing a lot of attention in the city to what a common fate that was for that particular category of people. These have all had their different effects, but definitely the biggest one in New Orleans history is the story of what happened right here in 1973 at the Upstairs Lounge. So for some context, we are right now on Iberville Street. This is a block off of Canal Street, really close to the main touristic strip where most of the big hotels are. And with that in mind, in 1970s, this was a strip where the gay bars you found were mostly patronized by hustlers and their clients. There was a lot of these guys back then, so when a guy was found out by his family, especially if he was young, it likely led to homelessness. And then two, if a police raid exposed a guy and he lost his job, well, there went his income. And so you got a lot of young men turning desperately to making their living off of the streets. And their customers often were tourists coming to New Orleans who had had a more successful time living in the closet than they had. And so this was the strip where those people found each other, right behind the big touristic hotels. The exception was the upstairs lounge. This was the bar where everybody knows your name and where the guy at the piano sings your name as you come in. Like the drag shows they had were charity benefits, and the place was even kind of a church for a while. There's the Metropolitan Community Church, the MCC, which is a gay-affirming Christian church that existed then and still does now in lots of cities. And they had a hard time back then finding space that they could operate out of. So this, for a little while, was where they got their congregation together. So you could come to this bar and go to Sunday services and then stay around for the Sunday beer bust afterwards. So it was a community hangout for like couples and their friends. It was where like commitment ceremonies happened. It was wholesome. And I just have to emphasize like how unlikely that was, how much the odds were against a place like that forming, because at this time, men or women having sex with each other is an imprisonable crime anywhere in the United States. In New Orleans, it was illegal to rent a house or sell a house to a same-sex couple. And the social hostilities were such that like the Archbishop of New Orleans had his name on ads in the newspaper demanding that newspapers never print anything about homosexuality unless it was in moral condemnation. The police here and lots of other police departments around the country were kind of working together around more ways to entrap people, and strangers coming into a bar like this could very well be a plainclothes police officer looking to entrap. And so they had a policy here of never serving anybody who wasn't vouched for personally by one of the clients they already knew. And the most friendly institution in New Orleans at the time would have been academia, where they at least thought you were the victim of an unfortunate mental disorder. And at Tulane University here in town, there was the head of the psychiatry department who was publishing papers looking into possible methods for conversion therapy. So from all sides, any of these people, they had such a massive pressure on them to hide this secret, such enormous consequences if they failed to, and this pressure would bring the worst out of anybody. And in those situations, you had this massive crowd down here, any number of which, any of those people could have ruined the lives of everybody else present with a phone call to the police at any time. So the odds were just enormously against a place where everybody knew your name. So on a Sunday night in June in 1973, there's a Sunday evening gathering going on here. It's super crowded, and a couple of young men come in. One of them is one of these Iberville street hustlers, and he is dealing with all the same troubles as everybody else, plus a few. He's done time in a mental hospital, he's epileptic, and he's aging out of his youthful good looks. And just before he came here, at one of the other hustler bars, he had a younger, better looking man swoop in and take one of his potential prospects away. So, tough night for this guy. He comes into the bar, locks himself into one of the bathroom stalls, and he starts soliciting the people in the next stall over, which is against the rules in this place. And so ultimately a couple of the customers pull him out. He starts to taunt them, someone punches him in the face, and he gets kicked out, leaves muttering threats the whole time. A few minutes later, at a pharmacy around the corner, someone close to his description shows up and asks to buy a can of lighter fluid. And shortly after that, two young men are seen outside of the door to the upstairs lounge, drenching the door and the lower steps and setting them on fire. As the name the upstairs lounge suggests, this place is up a long stairway, so you would have had to go up all these stairs and through a heavy door to get into the actual bar proper. So while in no time at all people down here knew what was going on and were calling for help, the people upstairs in the bar had no idea what was happening until the fire had already consumed the stairway. The first warning they got was that a door buzzer down here at street level was going off continuously. The bartender asked somebody to investigate what it was, and when that guy opened up the door, a fireball exploded into the room. And from that moment on, the lights were out, the room was filled with smoke, and people were gradually succumbing to the fire. People reacted a few different ways. So Some of them were near a window to a fire exit, broke through it, got out. The fire exit only went up, but they jumped a story down to the street here, got to safety. Another group of them retreated from the fire. The bartender jumped over the bar and calling to people and grabbing people, him knowing his way around, led 20-odd people through the fire to an inconspicuous alternate exit. He gets these people to safety, but he doesn't manage to get his own partner. And one of the guys he saves goes back in looking for his partner and never comes back out again. The group of people backed up against the windows. They're trapped between these windows and the fire, and the windows have metal bars on the outside separated by 10 inches. So even after they break the windows, only the smallest people can fit between. And even then, there's the story jump down, several of them on fire as they land. And ultimately, those that do make it down, along with the crowd that's accumulated out here, have to look up and watch as what happens to all the people who couldn't get out. And one man is caught halfway out the window and dies there, and is there for several hours to come as hundreds of people pass underneath. So these are really brutal details, but I just think they're important for understanding the response that comes after. So in the immediate follow-up, there's firemen, there's police, but there's also journalists, and they come in to speak to the survivors, and these people are stunned, and they do something they might normally not do, which is they tell their real names. And so immediately some of these folks are on record, and that is the beginning of the end for them. As things go to press the next day, newspapers print the story as a fire, and sometimes they include very prominently photos of burned bodies. But they save any mention that these were gay people until well into the depths of the newspaper, so as not to offend anyone. When they do mention it, though, they mention specific names, and people commence to getting fired, including somebody who finds out that they've lost their job from inside of the burn ward, a heterosexual woman who was hanging out at this place, who didn't even have, an arguable crime, just social disapproval. So when the news does come out, it's focusing on the fire as a fire. The social conversation out loud on the street and on the radio is entirely about the sexuality of the people who were attacked. In that case, you hear radio broadcasts did this, people talked later about the stuff they heard. Lines like, "Did you hear about the flaming queens?" Stuff like that. And several of the survivors going to work the next day to hang on to the job they otherwise would have lost had to pretend as they heard those conversations that they didn't know anything about it, so as not to draw attention to themselves. In the end, the news only lasts a couple of days, and it peters out in large part because so do the investigations by the police, the fire department, and the fire marshal. No one investigates for very long, and a thorough investigation is not really done until much, much, much later. In the end, there were more news articles about the upstairs lounge fire in 2016 than there were in 1973. And that's because in 2016, the massacre that happened at the Pulse nightclub in Florida finally surpassed the upstairs lounge fire as the deadliest event to happen to gay people in American history. So you have ultimately this memorial that's put there, this little plaque down at street level to honor the 32 people killed, the many more injured, and indirectly the survivors. Some of the people killed were never identified to this day. And they also were memorialized in their own time, too. There were 2 memorials following on this event, both held at churches. One was the very next day. So it really came down to people from outside New Orleans to organize this stuff. There wasn't really an organized, in the political sense, gay community in New Orleans. Not that would have done something as, to the sensibilities of the time, radical as having a big public memorial ceremony. Something private might have been done, but not something that was open to the public. And so it was, well, if there was an organization like that, it was the Metropolitan Community Church, and they had lost a third of their membership to this fire. So it was MCC leadership from out of town and other activists from out of town who, when they came here, ultimately organized the 2 different memorial events that happened. Again, one of them was right afterwards, but it was sparsely attended, and it was held at St. George's Episcopal Church uptown. The second one they wanted to do in a bigger, more public way and in coordination with remembrance events all across the country. And they couldn't repeat it at St. George's because the minister who allowed them to do that there was censured and received death threats. So they went looking for another space, and they actually found it here in the French Quarter. And I first heard this story from Sandy. So we're gonna take you out there, and I'd love for you to hear it from her as well. So Sandy, having told the story of the upstairs lounge, you actually were the first person who told me some of the, I guess, the sort of uplifting part about how this ended. I mean, it's a brutal ending to the story, but with a little bit of satisfaction at the end. You want to share what went on after the fire and after everything was put out?
I mean, there's still some really brutal things before we get to the kind of slightly uplifting part of the story.
Promising y'all that we get there.
Unfortunately. The aftermath was pretty terrible as well, because not only did the police department not really investigate the arson, they were actually claiming that it wasn't an arson. There were no politicians that discussed it. There were no city hall meetings. There were no calling of city council. There was nothing. And even worse than that was what you heard radio announcers say, which was, how do you bury a gay man in a fruit jar? I mean, there were really horrific things that were being said in the aftermath of it. And even family members weren't claiming the bodies of the dead, and no churches were stepping forward to actually have the funerals, except for 2 churches. One was uptown, and then this one, which is St. Mark's Church.
We're right now out on Rampart Street at the edge of the French Quarter, so the story begins and ends out here, at least for some of the people involved, but this was a very different church from average. For it being in the French Quarter, you know, it was a product of its neighborhood.
Absolutely. And it's still, by the way, very inclusive today. And it says on there that they welcome all people regardless of your sexuality or any of your affirmations as far as LGBTQ plus goes. They were having one of the funerals, and the head of the MCC, which was a church that had begun by the gay community, and that several of the members were the ones that had actually died in the upstairs lounge fire. And so he was saying, you know, he had given them a rousing speech where he was like, you can't be silent here anymore. It doesn't serve your community to be quiet, because now you're dying and you need to step up and do something. And then at the very end of the speech, he said, but listen, I understand there's the whole press is out front of the doors, and if you don't want to be outed, then don't go out the back doors. You're gonna have to, don't go out the front doors. You're gonna have to go out the back door and try to get away as quickly as you possibly can. And my understanding of this is that it was a lesbian in the audience that stood up and said, I'm going out the front door. And she went out the front door, and then every single person inside of that church followed her. This really galvanized the local community here and started to push that community towards activism, to the point that we've really made some amazing strides in the city of New Orleans. I mean, when you look at the fact that in 1991, there's an anti-discrimination bill that gets passed here in the city of New Orleans. And I believe it was as early as 1993 that New Orleans was recognizing domestic partnerships.
Yeah. Even the state had hate crimes in the 90s that were gay inclusive. So there's, even at the state level, things that motivation that started here had some bigger effects.
Yeah, I mean,
sure.
I think they even add gender identity in 1998 to the 1991 anti-discrimination bill here. So, it did in the end help this community really rally around itself and these causes and push us forward into something better.
And it having been a lesbian who spoke up and did kind of the let's do this moment, I mean, that has notes of Stonewall about it.
Absolutely.
The Stonewall Uprising, for those not familiar, argued as the galvanizing moment for the whole movement across the country. It was a described butch lesbian woman, mixed race woman.
That's what I'm talking about.
From New Orleans.
Butch lesbian.
Named Stormé de Larverie, Creole, who ended up being, as in many of the accounts at least, the person who at Stonewall said, why don't you do something, as she was being dragged into a cop car, and really turned that from one more submissive police raid to this first big instance in New York of pushing back.
Absolutely.
So similar stories, it just repeats itself over and over again in each city.
Absolutely.
Speaking of heroic lesbians,
I love speaking about heroic lesbians.
Let's have you do it some more. We used to have a really kind of entrepreneurial lesbian-run lesbian bar scene in and around the French Quarter, and also one named for a seminal piece of lesbian literature. So shall we pay those a visit?
Absolutely.
Cool. I head off this way, y'all. So we've moved over to the opposite side of the quarter. We're by the French Market now and the Mississippi River on Decatur Street, where prior to 2012, the very last lesbian bar in the French Quarter was. You want to tell us about Ruby Fruit Jungle?
Yeah, Ruby Fruit Jungle. I got the opportunity to go there a few times. It was named after Rita Mae Brown's novel, a 1973 novel. It's kind of autobiographical in that she was talking about what it was like for her growing up, being in the community, being in the lesbian and queer community. And it was a pretty, for the time, especially explicit book about lesbian encounters. So, you know, every lesbian read it in secret, like when their parents weren't noticing, and we hid it under our mattresses and other places to keep our parents from realizing what we were reading. But what was great, you know, I mean, we've talked a little bit about lesbians, and we've talked about the need to have safe spaces within the community. So lesbian bars existed to create those safe spaces for us, but they weren't always 100% safe, because unfortunately you would have police raids that happened with all of the gay bars, not just lesbian bars. And at that time, when they did those police raids, as you know, they would publish the names of the people who had been arrested, their names and photos in the papers, so that you were completely outed across the city. And there was a woman by the name of Charlene Snyder that was arrested in the 1970s. And at the time, she had a government job with high security clearance. And when they put her picture and her name and outed her in the newspaper, she lost everything. She lost her job, her career, everything went to hell. And rather than just kind of wallow in it, what she turned around and did was open up Charlene's, which was probably the most famous lesbian bar in New Orleans. And it even got international attention. And that bar wasn't in the French Quarter, but it was in the neighborhood adjacent, the Marigny. And it closed, if I recall correctly, in 1999, and I actually got a chance to visit that lesbian bar, and I'm fangirling out about that, because Charlene, man, it's Charlene. She was such a big voice within the community, and not just advocating for like lesbian rights, but for transgender rights and for, you know, bisexuals and for the whole spectrum of LGBTQ+. But I do want to say one thing about these bars that I've mentioned, is they were predominantly white lesbian bars. And that meant it wasn't that they weren't welcoming for Black lesbians or lesbians of color. It was just the biggest thing that was happening at that time period was they weren't 100% inclusive in that they weren't playing Black music at these bars. And so Black lesbians and lesbians of color could go to those bars for sure, but they didn't feel 100% at home. So in the 1980s, there was a woman who started a bar called Les Pierres, and that was located over on North Rampart and Pauger Street. And that is a pivotal bar because it was a place where people of color and Black lesbians and bisexuals and queer could go and sort of just 100% be their authentic selves. And not only that, but Les Pierres would host the very first drag king show in the city of New Orleans. So that's pretty pivotal.
Yeah.
And those drag king shows, I'm told that was definitely before my time. I'm told that they were amazingly over the top. Like if you had a beach scene, they brought in beach sand. If it was a park scene, they brought in shrubbery and a park bench, and they laid that stuff out.
I don't know if I've ever seen a drag show with scenic design.
I haven't. I mean, drag kings of the world, you're on notice.
The bar is set.
Yeah, you're on notice.
When one goes looking for like lesbian spaces, whether they're, you know, transient, obviously at this point, what do you find? Like, is there anything?
Unfortunately, now I don't know of a lesbian bar in Orleans Parish at all. And I'm not even sure that in the surrounding communities of Metairie or Kenner we even have any lesbian bars left. And I think, part of the problem with that is that women, unfortunately, have historically been the caretakers of families, whether that was caring for elderly parents or often having children of their own. So they couldn't turn out like gay men turn out to drink. And then your bar, if you don't have that level of people coming in, you just can't stay viable. You can't stay in business for very long. But the other problem is that traditionally women have not earned the same incomes as men. And so lesbian bars were often in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, and they revolved around really working class lesbians. And then as gentrification has started to set in throughout the country, unfortunately, they've become a casualty of that gentrification because they couldn't afford the rent anymore, and then they've closed and they haven't found any other venues where they could open.
So it's not for lack of people saying, like, I want to open a space. It's really, like, not viable once you try. It's like a harder business model to run.
And I mean, since Hurricane Katrina, we've had a couple of like groups get together where they've tried to have like roving spaces for lesbians in different bars around town. Girl Spot. And that's cool. It's just, I mean, I don't know now since COVID, I don't even think that's up and running.
Girl Spot had an event a few days ago as we're speaking. And I was actually surprised to see that. So
they're gonna take my toaster.
But leave you your multi-tool for now.
Of course.
Yeah, as far as like events that you can find in town, y'all, looking up what's going on through Girl Spot, GRRL, is one possibility for finding events going on in town.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it is like generally queer inclusive spaces. I would think of like Kiki uptown, spelled with Q's, QIQI, and the lesbian friendliness of some of these bars here in the quarter, but like a primarily lesbian space is not really a thing you find except day by day.
Yeah, sadly. One thing that I do want to do a shout out to, if you want to know more about like lesbian spaces and lesbian history in New Orleans, I want to give a shout out to the Dyke Bar History Project. They've been really good about collecting oral histories and trying to really preserve the people that came before us and really paved the way for what we have now.
You can find them, they're also called Last Call New Orleans, Last Call NOLA, and their website also has a link to a podcast they've done so you can hear those oral interviews and other types of stories that match up well with them. So there's a lot of great history out there, even if the present is not what we might hope it would be.
All right, let's go do it.
Yeah. So, y'all, if you end up walking along the main gay strip, the Lavender Line, as some call it, the Fruit Loop, as we also affectionately call it, you might, in amongst the bars and the po' boy shop and the Pride paraphernalia store, notice also that there's a Voodoo shop in the area, and this ties in with stories we told in the past about Robi's religion. And Robi, you've told me off camera about stories where these things totally belong together. Do you want to share some of that?
I do. First off, there's this big old strong belief, especially amongst a lot of homophobic African American people, that you can't be a part of an African-based tradition unless you are a straight person, and that is a lie. The reason why that's a lie is because we have a lot of spirits, Orisha and Loa, on both the Haitian and the African side that are actually double and triple gendered. And a lot of these spirits are some of these spirits that you would have never guessed. They're so masculine, you would think that they wouldn't have a feminine side, but they do. And there's one spirit in particular, I love talking about this, it's gonna make a whole bunch of people mad. We have this spirit, her name is Oya. She's the spirit of the marketplace, but a lot of people don't know. She's more of a lesbian than she is straight. Yes, she does walk with a masculine spirit, but she also walks with a lot of women, especially business women. And I don't mean walk with them as in I'm by your side, let me go take you to the marketplace. I mean walk with them, if you catch what I'm saying. So the fact that we have this in our traditions, and not just in plantation Vodou, Haitian Vodou, African Vodun, Santeria, Paulo, Ifa, Candomblé, Obeya, Lakumi, all have the same thing.
Quite a list of African diaspora religions.
There's no way around this. Now, you've already seen Conjure New Orleans in the Voodoo video. We're back in the same area, but I also want to talk about Bourbon Pride. Now, from my experience being in this city, they've been actually supporting the LGBT community, the Black community, the Latina community, and a lot of suppressed people have been supported by Bourbon Pride. and it's just a gay novelty store. Who'd have thunk it, right? Just a random gay store on Bourbon Street is actually supporting all these communities by just letting you know we do not tolerate any discrimination in this store, around this building, outside this building, and in New Orleans, period. I love this place.
And Robi, if you had to give somebody an example of, I don't know, something that might be for sale there.
Exhibit A, all of this here, get a good look, James, get it all. Come back up real slow so you can get my face in a minute. Move, baby, move, yes, boom. Bam. I purchased all of this from right here at Bourbon Pride, all of it. Let me tell you what had happened. So what had happened was, I went inside of Bourbon Pride. My friend Doug actually works up in there right now, and I know the owners of the place. And I said, Doug, our next YouTube video is gonna be about the LGBTQ community in New Orleans. Doug started snatching stuff off the walls. Oh, you're gonna need this shirt, you're gonna need this, these shorts, you're gonna need this, and here. And he threw this together for me. He's in there right now, because I think of it. So shout out to Doug at Bourbon Pride. Shout out to Josh and Joseph who own the building. Thank y'all so much. I love y'all.
Beautiful. So yeah, lots more stories in this line, and to be able to grow up in rural Louisiana, in a place that in many respects is really hostile, with stories that say, here are people, here's like a love story between two women, here's a relationship that doesn't involve clearly defined gender lines. It kind of is a whole different thing to imagine from what a lot of us know in our upbringing, and this idea that we have to cut against what we're told as we grow up. And it was an incredible thing to hear that you had that when you were growing up.
Yes, I had that. At least I had that. A lot of people don't have that. They don't have the support, they don't have the stories, they don't have anything they can actually lean on, especially if they might be questioning their sexuality or their gender or the combination of. I had that, believe it or not. I didn't get it from where I wanted it, but I still had it.
And look at the confidence machine that was the result.
Can't nobody tell me nothing about Robi.
All of us could learn a trick or two. On we go?
On we go.
Yeah, we've moved a little bit along Bourbon Street to right by those couple of bars that really form the heart of the Lavender Line, or the Fruit Loop as it's occasionally affectionately known. We have on either side of the street right here, Oz and the Bourbon Pub, which again are kind of the fixture of the festival scene and just the day-to-day scene here. And y'all, if you were to turn right over here onto St. Anne Street, you'd find a couple of other bars. First, a more laid-back place called Good Friends, and then the Leather Bar, which is called Rawhide. Further scattered around the quarter, we have a few other places. There's the Crossing, there's the Golden Lantern, there's the Page, which is the only one of these that has a mostly black clientele. And then there's Grand Prix, also out on Rampart Street. So Betty's as well, place for food and a bar, laid back atmosphere, all in one. So you have a lot of choices looking around in the quarter, in addition to the ones that we've mentioned before. But this also becomes a real center of attention during Mardi Gras. There's an event that goes down here called the Bourbon Street Awards, and they'll set up a stage somewhere in or near this intersection, and it is a drag queen judged and drag queen emceed costume contest. Costumes being a huge part of Mardi Gras, they judge the best ones in various categories as folks go by. And the competition is pretty steep because the Bourbon Street Awards are on Mardi Gras Day, and people prep for Mardi Gras Day all year long here. This is where we get into something that you have in New Orleans that you will not find anywhere else, which is what we call gay Mardi Gras. And it is, like a lot of innovations, an adaptation to a problem. So back in, as we've mentioned, the 40s and 50s, we get this amplification of the gay scene here, but it also comes with this ramping up of tourism. And because of the growth of tourism in the French Quarter, the city really felt the need to clean up the neighborhood. And so you get increasing police raids. They've already been a thing before, and new laws have already been passed to make it easier and easier to corner people, but that really goes further in the 40s and 50s. For example, you have this law that's passed that people can't wear a piece of clothing belonging to the opposite of their perceived sex. But while those laws were pretty common across the country, in New Orleans, there was an exception to that law specifically for Mardi Gras. We have this cultural tradition where people cross-dress all the time and flip around all kinds of other typical familiar orders. So gay folks were able to find a little bit of space on Mardi Gras in an informal way, and they gradually formalized it over time. The way this goes is late in the 50s, you start to get people having these house parties along Mardi Gras parade routes, dressing in drag, giving out prizes. And then a group called the Crew of Yuga starts to form around this, abbreviated as KY. And then they end up holding a ball imitating Mardi Gras royalty in the kind of high society version of Mardi Gras, where they'll declare a king and a queen. And in, let's call it straight Mardi Gras, this typically is gonna be a middle-aged businessman and a like just past 16 debutante. So it's a strange pairing, lots to send up. And at the gay Mardi Gras balls, you know, the queen might be a woman, might not. You have endless options. Usually, though, whoever it is, it's as far from a debutante as it's possible to be. So as you're getting into the 1960s, these events are formalizing more and more. And then in 1962, the Krewe of Yuga ball is raided by the police, the charge being disturbing the peace. And people are in drag all over the place. They go fleeing out the windows of the building, running off into the woods. 95 people are arrested. And in some cases, their drag didn't do them a lot of good. Not only made it harder to run, but one guy, allegedly, was caught by the police because flashlights on his sequins helped spot him where he was hiding. A lot of the typical sad stories of entrapment here, but there's three kind of encouraging takeaways from this story. In some cases, actually, the drag was helpful. One guy allegedly managed to get through the woods and, despite being covered in mud, showed up at an old woman's house, knocked on her door, and managed to pass himself off as a young woman in distress who had been on a date that went wrong. And this woman let him use her phone to call for help. So, one little small story of things going better. On a bigger scale, as we mentioned, further along the street used to be Dixie's Bar of Music, which was owned by this awesome lesbian clarinet player. And when she heard about this, it was pretty evident right away that a lot of the people arrested were her customers. And she immediately paid bail for them. There's 95 people bailed out of jail, and even though a lot of the consequences we've touched on, job loss and that kind of thing, were waiting for these people regardless, jail itself, when you were gay, and especially when you were in drag, could be a pretty horrific experience, and she saved them that humiliation and maybe that danger. And then finally, the biggest outcome of this is that drag balls and just general gay balls are still a thing during Mardi Gras celebrations here. There's a lot of them. Krewe of Yuga didn't last, but members of it founded the Krewe of Petronius a few years later, and now we also have the Krewe of Arminius and various others. And what they did immediately to adapt was that they required everybody to be in the clothing of their assigned gender most of the night, but then they would put on sort of a pageant. And today, some of those, you can pay for tickets for, so you could go to the Arminius or Petronius ball if you're here during the Mardi Gras season and see this stuff in person. And then also, you can see them out here on the street showing those costumes and competing in the Bourbon Street Awards. And these costumes are mind-blowing. They are giant wearable sculptures a great deal of the time that take up way, way more room than just the person itself. So while the tickets can be pretty high demand, you have a much, much better chance of getting your hands on a ball ticket than you have of beating one of these people at the Bourbon Street Awards. So don't get your hopes up too high, but come with your best. We'll still enjoy seeing it one way or another. We've got Ellen DeGeneres. We've got Brian Batt.
Deepest Soul.
Bianca Del Rio.
Naturally.
RuPaul's Drag Race.
And in the vein of slightly less famous drag queens, but no less worthwhile, we've got Varla Jean Merman. Hasn't been on Drag Race, but if you know drag outside of that, Varla's worth knowing about.
Vin Santos.
Fixture of local drag.
Fixture.
And muse of many of the younger generation.
Yes.
How about, less famous, more historical people. Tennessee Williams, of course.
Truman Capote.
Truman Capote, both former residents of the French Quarter. And then if we get outside of the French Quarter, there's Patsy Vidalia, who was the drag MC for a couple of decades at the Dewdrop Inn, which was the go-to black music venue in town during segregation. And performed in drag that whole time in front of like Ike and Tina Turner and everybody.
Nice.
Let's see who else we got. We got our Sissy Bounce artists.
Oh yes, we got Big Frida.
Katie Red.
And even though Bessie Jackson wasn't from here, I want to do a shout out to Bessie Jackson, who wrote a song called the Bulldyke Blues. And she would also co-write a lot of other songs that blues musicians performed, but also jazz musicians. And since New Orleans is the birthplace of jazz, I've tied it all the way back in, and that's solely because I want to say Bulldyke Blues again.
Yes.
And in that same vein, we have James Booker, who has been described as I get this quote approximately right, the greatest gay, black, one-eyed, junkie piano genius that New Orleans ever produced.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
That's a mouthful.
A lot of great people.
We're on the same wavelength.
Not an eyeful, though. How about, what do we think? So we talked about some of the bars in the French Quarter. We've got Lafitte's in Exile, oldest in the country perhaps. We've got Oz the Pub, Good Friends, the Golden Lantern. What about bars worth seeing outside the French Quarter?
Phoenix. I performed at the Phoenix, actually, the Phoenix.
That's like the leather bar.
Yeah, y'all thought I wasn't crazy, but I'm crazy.
And actually right across the street from the Phoenix is Mags. And Mags is located where Charlene's used to be. And they even have a plaque on the outside of Mags commemorating Charlene and her life.
Nice. We've also got right around the corner from there the Always Lounge, which is a very kind of everybody's welcome, as the name suggests, 2 L's in Always. And it is a kind of very queer, positive, burlesque, drag, all kinds of other performance space, along with just being a bar a lot of the time. How about organizations in town that are huge fixtures of queer life here?
Crescent Care. They've been big for me. They're where my medical provider is. They're huge. They actually are an organization, a group of doctors and nurses who have come together to form Crescent Care to actually help LGBTQ people, youth and up.
Nice.
Very nice.
Got Ambush Magazine. It's a queer-specific, heavily towards gay men publication. A lot of news and some great history in there too. And Frank Perez, who writes for that, is actually one of the best
I know Frank personally. Actually,
pieces of insight on gay history in town.
Yeah, I teach classes for him for tour guides who want to know more about Voodoo. So Frank is actually one of the few tour guides that actually has a gay tour that actually happens.
That's right. So shout out to him too.
Yeah.
We also have House of Tulip, which is a shelter that caters to the trans community as well as anyone who is gender non-conforming.
Nice.
Because a lot of shelters won't take trans community members, nor will they take gender non-conforming members.
Since there's hard divide in the space for men and women. Y'all, that is our little introduction to Pride Land down here in the French Quarter. Lots more to see, but you got to do it in person. In the meantime, thank y'all for watching, and like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell so you'll find out more about that. And if y'all don't mind, we make these videos for y'all. We put a lot of time into it, so show us a little love down below. You'll see the link to drop us a tip, and it'll be shared between all parties present. And yeah, making the most of down below. Thank you, Robi. Thanks for illustrating the concept. Y'all know which way is down now. We educate y'all about all kinds of things. Lesbians.
Thank y'all so much. Lesbians. Thank y'all. We really appreciate y'all watching. We really appreciate y'all watching these videos. I, for one, can definitely say I appreciate all the positive feedback we get on the streets. Y'all are walking up to us on the streets. Y'all bold.
We've been running into lots of y'all today.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. And
y'all don't know me yet.
Yeah, y'all, they're going to get to know you. They're going to be like, oh, that's the lesbian.
Lesbian invisibility is about to be a thing of the
Yes,
past.
thank God.
At least for this one.
Thanks for saying it, but we really do appreciate all the likes. We really appreciate the positive feedback, and it's because of y'all that we continue to make these videos and put New Orleans on the map, putting us on the map, and we just really appreciate y'all time and effort and just giving us all this positivity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all, and happy Pride Month. See you soon.
Yeah, happy Pride.
Cool. Bam. Girl, you know better. You're down.
Come here, boy. Come here,
Okay, so take a shot and then say as much of LGBTQQIAGNC plus as you can.
There's an
God.
NC plus?
GNC.
GNC.
Gender non-conforming.
Gender non-conforming.
Right.
But we
That's
gotta
right.
remember that.
Love you.
Y'all be safe.
Have a good night, y'all.
Take care. So is it
After the shot. After
okay,
the shot.
after the shot we say.
All right.
Okay.
So one at a
Okay.
time or all together?
All together.
Okay. Cool. Cheers.
Salud, salud,
Cheers.
salud.
Happy Pride.
Oh, God. If we were to turn right over here onto St. Anne, you would hit first a more laid-back bar called Good Friends, and then the leather bar, which is called, God, left me both times, Rawhide. Do it again. Let these people by. That's, all right, that's the take.
See this whole lot of Baton Rouge doing all this shit, you hear me? Hey, stop playing with a nigga. Stop
Put it in the Baton Rouge video. Put it in the Baton Rouge one.
I'm from the beyond.
This is all real.
Hey, this is real life right here.
We're from Baton Rouge too. Nice to meet y'all.
This Baton Rouge like 30 minutes away from Baton Rouge. Yeah, we Baton Rouge.
We're from St. Francisville, same thing.
That bottom,
Gotcha, yeah.
Stop fucking playing with me, bro.
Y'all enjoy your walk. Very good, very good. Nice. It looks like it's happening. What?
If you're not seeing the guy, oh, you can see the guy in the van.
Better and better.
He's got on pink pants. Where did he go?
Shall we give it another run? Right. And then in 1962, the crew of Yuga Ball is raided by the police. And the idea with this, hey, thank you very much.
There's a lot of things going on here in New Orleans in 1962.
Thanks for that insight. Appreciate you.
I'll tell you all about it.
Chuck don't give a fuck.